right, welcome everyone. It's really wonderful to have you all with us tonight for a conversation with Jamia Wilson and Cierra Kaler-Jones, the first of our Alison R. Bernstein Media Mentoring Program events this year, featuring leaders in the industry who will share their insights, expertise, and guidance with all of us in the program throughout the year. My name is Kylie Davidson. I'm the coordinator of this program, and I'm so excited to get this evening started and to kick us off. The Alison R. Bernstein Media Mentoring Program was born from a collaboration with the School of Communication and Information and the Institute for Women's Leadership at Rutgers University. And as I mentioned, this event will be the first of many throughout the program year. Together, through workshops, conversations, and networking hours, we'll be inspired by and learn from experts in media, journalism, and technology. And most importantly, we will fortify a community determined to create a more just, inclusive media world. This work carries forth the vision of Alison R. Bernstein, our late director of the IWL, who sought to support young women throughout the industry so that we may create a better future of media. Each year, we gather at events such as this one to tackle big ideas in intimate conversations and to cultivate and support new leaders who take to the industry, chip away at its barriers, and fight for change. Our featured speakers tonight know a thing or two about that kind of work, and it is my absolute pleasure to introduce both of them to you all. Jamia Wilson is a feminist activist, writer, and speaker, and she joined Random House as vice president and executive editor in 2021. As the former director of the Feminist Press at the City University of New York and the former vice president of programs at the Women's Media Center, Jamia has been a leading voice on women's rights issues for over a decade. Her work has appeared in numerous outlets, including the New York Times, The Today Show, CNN, Elle, BBC, Rookie, Refinery 29, Glamour, Teen Vogue, and The Washington Post, to name a few. She's the author of Young, Gifted, and Black, The Introduction in Oral History, and Together We Rise Behind the Scenes at the Protest Heard Around the World, Step Into Your Power, 23 Lessons on How to Live Your Best Life, Big Ideas for Young Thinkers, ABCs of AOC, and the co-author of Roadmap for Revolutionaries, Resistance, Advocacy, and Activism for All. In August, she published her latest, This Book is Feminist, an introduction to intersectional feminism for next generation changemakers. In conversation with Jamia tonight is Cierra Kaler-Jones, a social justice educator, researcher, and artist based in Washington, D.C. Dr. Kaler-Jones's research broadly focuses on how to create and sustain educational spaces rooted in joy and love, while refuting control and management tactics in schools that deny young people opportunities for creativity and critical consciousness building. Her heart's work includes running a program that uses art and education to fuel social change through the co-creation of healing-centered spaces for and with Black girls and transgender nonconforming young people. In 2014, Cierra became the second Black woman to win the title of Miss New Jersey, and in 2015, she lived out her childhood dream of competing for Miss America. She's currently the director of storytelling for Communities for Just Schools Fund, a donor collaborative that resources education justice organizing across North America. Her writing and work have been featured in Education Post, Medium, Ebony, Midnight and Indigo, Middle School Journal, Rethinking Schools, and the books Strong Black Girls, Reclaiming Schools in Their Own Image, and Black Girl Civics, Expanding and Navigating the Boundaries of Civic Engagement. And of course, I cannot forget to mention that Cierra is a proud alumna of Rutgers University Douglas Residential College and of the Institute for Women's Leadership Leadership Scholar Certificate Program. I am so beyond thrilled to have Cierra and Jamia with us tonight, to have all of you for what is going to be an amazing, brilliant conversation. And with that, I am going to throw it over to Cierra to get us started. Cierra?
Thank you so much, Kylie, and thank you, everyone. I'm really thrilled to be in this conversation. Admittedly, for the past couple of weeks, I've been so jazzed and so excited for today. So I'm so glad to be able to be in conversation with Jamia Wilson. So I'm completely fangirling and just really grateful for you and all of the work that you do, and really looking forward to digging into conversation together. So I'm going to just jump right in with the first question that I have for you, Jamia, which is, you have such an impressive history and resume. And so I would love to hear from you. What is your heart's work? What fulfills you? What sustains you? How did you come to the work that you do now?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm fangirling right back, and I love what you're doing out in the world and with joy, and also just love the amazing work that you are doing at Rutgers and beyond. And I think for me, the heart work is around storytelling. So I love to storytell through writing and speaking. Uh, Also through music, I've been dabbling in opera a little bit with my partner, who's a jazz musician. We've done some operas together, and I did libretto for a couple of operas with him. But just anything around storytelling and expression, I feel like that's such a gift we have in life, to be able to communicate and to express ourselves. And so I loved storytelling myself, but then what I love even more than that is to be in other people's stories. And my day job, I'm an editor, and I just love championing authors and rooting them on and being able to sometimes see what another person can't see about the possibility of their voice and their work, because other people have done that for me. So I know that that's important. And I just love to be able to be a megaphone for other voices and diverse voices and voices that have been left out of the conversation for too long. So that's what's in my heart. And I feel really blessed that my life has come in such a way, things have come together in such a way that I can do work that I can genuinely say I feel very passionate about, and that I love going to work every day.
Oh, that touches my heart so deeply, because whenever I ask that question of what is your heart's work, I always remember that I have to be prepared to also answer that question. And I would answer it in the same way that you have. My heart's work is really embedded in storytelling, particularly for social justice, recognizing that the stories that we tell and how we tell them shape and influence beliefs and values, which ultimately shape our actions. It shapes the ways that we either uphold or dismantle the status quo. And I think often about Chimamanda and Ngozi Adichie's TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, when she says, when you tell a story about something again and again, that is what it becomes. And that's what I appreciated about your answer and about your work, because you're really shifting. You're shifting the ways that the dominant narratives have always been shared, and really centering it in diverse voices and ensuring that those voices are really at the center, at the helm about how we are talking about issues in society. And I also love that you talk about art too, as a form of expression, as a form of storytelling, recognizing that art is not something, or that storytelling is not something that we only share through our voices, that there are many ways that we share stories. And so for myself, I'm a dancer. I've been dancing for, gosh, over 20 years now. And being able to really experience freedom and liberation through expression and through movement in the body is another way that we can tell stories. So I really just am appreciating how you're highlighting the importance of art and artistic expression to really diversify the ways that we are even sharing stories. And so one thing that has really been foundational as both a woman and a Black woman really is the statement that I am here to both take up space and also to create space, which is something that you talk about, especially because the places and spaces where I navigate, from academia to philanthropy to media, they were not spaces that were built for us, for me to survive and thrive. And so, Jamia, you are a trailblazer. And if I'm not mistaken, while you were at the Feminist Press, you were the youngest director in the press's history, and to head the in 2020 year is when you started your new position as the vice president and executive editor at Random House. So I just want to take a moment here to celebrate this for a minute. So go ahead and put those clap emojis up on screens, put your congratulations in the chat box. Yes, all the snaps, because I think that just your is worthy of celebration. that you have paved a path for so many of us to see ourselves represented in publishing and media. And so in this, I've heard use how you are both women who came before you. You talk about Toni Morrison and her influence, but you're also paving a path so that you won't be the last. So I would love about the idea of taking space professionally and personally. What does this look like in everyday practice? How is this embodied? But then also, what does it mean to look like? What does that feel?
Thank you so much. That was so beautiful. And I really want to appreciate you for just being so wonderful, but also, modeling how I think we should show up for each other. And that just is very moving to me. I feel, I was very lucky at Feminist Press to be able to have the honor of working with Florence Howe, who was the founder of the press 50 years ago, and being a part of Florence's life and having her mentorship and her friendship. And we loved each other very much. And, we ended up talking a lot in her final years about the future of publishing, feminist press, the world, social justice, storytelling for social justice. And, when I think of the kind of legacy I want to leave, a good ancestor while I'm on the planet also, it's one like Florence's. Florence helmed the press when people told her that she was absolutely nuts to want to start a feminist press. And I remember her kind of annoyed when she first started the idea, and then went to a women's liberation event, and then came home from this trip she'd been on where people had put money in her mailbox and thing, and she's thinking, oh my gosh, okay, I talked about this idea, now I have to do it because you sent me $50. And I was thinking about that in the context of how, to have a vision and follow it. And what I'm hoping to do is to do that now, and to embody that and model that for others, and also for myself. And that's taking up space, right? And taking up space when you're bringing others with you. Florence started this 50 years ago and had made the feminist press intersectional in its very early days. So a lot of times when people talk about the second wave conversation with the other books that came before them, right? And after. And so I felt when I was there as if I was listening to what was needing to be in conversation with those books, and conversation with what was happening on the streets now, because the feminist press was born out of a zeitgeist. In the 1970, school shootings were happening, the same problems were happening in different time. That there was the war, there was Kent State, there had been the Orangeburg massacre, which my mom had been in. All these things had been happening in the war and around it. Social injustice, the Panthers and the Young Lords, all of these things were happening. And when I looked at what was happening when I started at the press, and I thought, oh, different wrapping paper, same injustices, same problems. And here we are, 50 years later, publishing still has to happen, and the same root issues around gender-based violence, racial injustice, economic injustice, these things are still here. And so the books we have now to show how we've moved up over time, but also to speak about who we are now, so the next generations can also know who we are. And I thought about how they take space on the shelf, like the proverbial metaphorical shelf, and what that means for us. So because I think it was really kind of the movement facilitation technique that I really like, when they talk about saying move up instead of like step back. I think about taking space up and what we need to do. We all need to move up. So how are we growing in whatever we do? How are we extending our room, expanding the opportunity, expanding the access, and expanding the inclusion. I've started to try to say more now gender expansive language instead of gender inclusive, because when I hear people talking about concerns that they're going to lose something if someone else makes a gain, that comes from a place of scarcity. And sometimes include as a word doesn't fully show that we're actually expanding. So, if the least resourced trans refugee were in her human dignity, that is something that is important to me, but also it's important for my dignity and my freedom, right? So that's what I really think about with the moving up. And I feel that Florence always saw that. And I loved it too, because she was just so smart. I mean, anyone who hasn't met her, I'm just saying, like, to be in front of that brain was just a sight to behold. And she was sharp-tongued in the best way. But Florence would often, have people sometimes try to get her to support what they would assume she would think because of the time that she came out of. And I'm always kind of like, Florence is from the future, because when I heard her being asked about some poets and others who had changed how they were identifying gender-wise, and I think some people expected her not to be supportive or expansive in her response, she had an expansive, visionary response. It made sense to her that as time would evolve, we would evolve as a movement, in our lexicon, in how we show up. And so that's what I'm trying to do. And I don't always do it right. And sometimes I fail, but I try to be accountable. And I think that's a part of taking up space too, learning when sometimes you've overstepped and you might need to step back, regroup, and support somebody else moving up too.
Wow. So many things in what you have just shared as making my brain go in just 1,000 different directions, because there's so much brilliance in what you've just shared. And even just this note that you've left us on, I'm like breathing it out. I'm like, yes. And so I'm thinking particularly about even the word expansion, right? Like that physical expansion, and how you were talking about even the physical space of having those books on the shelves. And I'm thinking too about Fannie Lou Hamer. I know Dr. Keisha Blaine just came out with a new autobiography of Fannie Lou Hamer. And Fannie Lou Hamer says, nobody's free until we're all free. Right. And as you talk about Florence having this vision of expansiveness, I'm also thinking about how you talked about legacy, right? The expansiveness of legacy, that we are not just one person, but we are stories, and we have carried the stories of our ancestors, of everyone that we meet, all of the places that we get to go and experience, all the books that we read, all those that we come across, all of those conversations. We really are this interwoven thread of all of the stories that we've come across. And one of the core values in my life is the Ghanaian principle of Sankofa. It means to go back and get it. So be grounded in the history, to know yourself in the present, to be able to dream forward a new future. And really that's what you have highlighted for us, the importance of leaning into Sankofa, of knowing the history, of knowing the legacy, so that we can continue to dream forward together, as Adrienne Marie Brown says, a world that doesn't exist yet, which is exciting, a little daunting, but also very exciting that we get to do this work together. And another thing that you said that really touched me in thinking about the books being in conversation with one another in your work. Oftentimes in research, I have tried to view my citations as love notes to scholars, and just saying, and even on the physical page, being able to take up that space by saying, oh, I'm going to cite this person, because citations are political, who we cite and who we don't cite, those voices, those experiences, those stories, that knowledge, because so much of storytelling is dependent on power, right? Who has the power to shape the narrative? And so to be able to put those citations, to be in conversation with those scholars, is really a legacy. It's a love note, and also it is an enactment and embodiment of Sankofa. So I want to go back a little bit to how you just sang the beautiful praises of Florence Howe, and particularly within the context of this program, right? Thinking about mentorship. So I would love for you to talk a little bit more about the role of mentorship in your professional and personal life. Who have been some of your mentors? How has it impacted your work? And who inspires you in this work?
And that's so beautiful. I love Sankofa, so you just made me really happy. I was thinking about, I have a card that someone gave me once. It was from, one of those spiritual decks, and I pulled a Sankofa card and was so moved by it, I kept it at a convening. So you're making me think when I go home tonight, I gotta pull up my Sankofa card. This is like a sign that I need to lean into some Sankofa in the coming days. But yeah, mentorship's been really important to me. I feel really lucky that my mother was someone who really valued her relationships with other women, and the people who helped raise her up in terms of chosen family mentors, uh, professional connections, people who just inspired her creatively, that she always modeled that and then also encouraged that within me at a young age. Even, when I was a Girl Scout, just saying, oh, you said you like that person's book, you should write her an email or you should write her a letter. And I actually have a fun Feminist Press story around that, where I told Florence during my interview for the job, because I had read this book that had so moved me by an author, Ruth Kluger, who wrote a book about her experience during the Holocaust. It's a very harrowing experience called Still Alive. And she passed away. She passed away last year, I believe, too. And I corresponded a bit with her son about this experience I'd had. And when I read the book, it just stayed with me so much, because there was this relationship between a mother and daughter also in the book, and it really stuck with me. And I just decided, because my mom told me that it's always good to tell people who inspire you how they've impacted your life, to write her an email. And I was able to tell Florence that during many years later, during my interview at Feminist Press, when she asked me what my favorite Feminist Press book was. And she had said that was something that had been important to her and was unexpected during that interview. But I share it because Ruth Kluger responded to me and wrote me a very lovely email and was very kind. And, it just led me to think that the people who we want to learn from in life, no matter what walk of life, there's so much we can learn from many people and many different kinds of experiences in life and vocation, but also just the way they're living their life could inspire you through a mentorship, and that we should reach out to them because you might be surprised when they do respond to your email or agree to get coffee or agree to share something with you. And so that was an important lesson for me. I had no idea how that later would unfold, that correspondence that I had with her. And then when she passed, her son and I had a correspondence. And then she has a granddaughter who's now a writer, and a very good one, who I'm in connection with too over correspondence. And I just feel like when you bring people into your life, you can learn more from them than what you really thought you were going to get. But the reason I share that too is that I think sometimes we talk about mentorship as some sort of transactional thing. And I actually think that the relationships that are most important to me are those that have been transformational. So when you approach a mentorship relationship from a standpoint of how are we going to connect and grow together, and how can I also be of help to you, we grow to a place of transformation versus what can we take. And I think that that's sometimes why people don't end up getting the kind of mentorship connections they want, because we live in a transactional society that, in patriarchy, that teaches us that, we should just go for what we can get. It's dog eat dog, top down competition over collaborative. And I need to get that from that person and that person's sign off for me to be something. When in fact, what I think I have gained from in the true mentorships I've had is when they've been relationships developed over time, where people who have inspired me, helped me grow, helped me see something differently, that I have been able to share with them how I have grown, and also a bit of my life and a bit of, ways that I can be supportive to them in their work and their help. And so that reciprocity, I just think, is really important for a true mentorship, is what I believe that it's important. It doesn't mean you have to give someone something that is a transaction, right? It doesn't mean you have to give them money or, your labor. It's just, it's a feeling of it's almost like a practice of a stance, I think, in a sense of allowing the relationship to form in that way. A thing I've written about for young people has been, and I wrote it because it's something I also believe, is about life mentors not always having to be people who you know. So I think about doing life apprenticeships. There's all these people I want to learn from who might be deceased, so they're in the other world, or they may not be, at a place where they can take the time to meet me, or they might be ill, or whatever it is. And I started to think about a life apprenticeship, meaning, okay, if I can't get a hold of that person still, I can still write them letters to process them myself. I can still read everything they've written, watch their interviews, reflect. I can still learn from the way they live their life. And I'll give an example. So Maya Angelou, someone I'm so sad I didn't get a chance to meet in life. But I now, when I have book deadlines, get myself a hotel room because I found out it was what she would do, where she'd get a bare-boned hotel room. Because I'm not talking like one where you can watch all the channels and you get room service and it's fancy, because then, you can occupy yourself and procrastinate from writing that book during that, because when I first thought about that, I thought, oh, I'm going to try to blow my bank account and go somewhere fabulous. I think I need to write this book in Antigua. No, that's not what she's saying. She's talking about a bare bones Spartan bed, ice bucket, and table, and you on the page, just getting it done. And so when I was freaking out about a book I procrastinated on, I decided after reading that that's what she did, that I was going to do that. Now, because I'm, a little bit indulgent, that's just a part of how I keep up my joy in this hard world. I got myself a really great Black-owned B&B that has literary themed rooms that I went to. I had to have a little flavor and flair there, and it had a nice bathtub, which is also my requirement, but it really worked. There was something about it. And so even though I didn't get to meet her, I got to write in my journal, my thank you note to Mother Maya, as I put it, Mother Maya, Dr. Mother Maya. Thank you so much for teaching me that this is the way you helped me write my book. So I give you that example to say, yes, if there's these people who are alive who you want to meet, yes, connect with them in a transformative way and listen deeply, show up with your whole self, be willing to grow. Don't just go in for the transactional, what can I get, but really be there with your humble, beautiful human self to experience a real relationship. And if it's not possible for whatever reason, you can learn from them through their pages, through their podcasts, through their audio, through their books. And I continue to learn from my mother, who my friends were all mourning her when she passed because she was the CEO mom. She was, everybody's advice person for whenever things would happen. I had a life coach and a mommy boss in my life, and she was great. And I felt really lucky because my mom had been the first in her field before. So it was kind of interesting because I realized, oh, I'm super lucky that I can actually say, what's it like when you're the first Black woman to helm something? And my mom could give me an answer. And she's like, oh, in the first 18 months, this is what you're going to do. This is what you're going to do. This is what your 6-month plan is going to be. Like, she laid it out. But I still continue to learn from her, even though she's now passed away, because she took the time over the years to write me notes in the margins of books. She wrote me a lot of emails, and I go back to those emails all the time. And now that I have more maturity, I see the lessons in them. So I share that too, that, we think a lot of mentors just being people who have a lot of recognition and a lot of fame, but it's not just that. I learned a lot about how to live life and how to treat people from my mom. I learned a lot about how to flourish in life from my grandmother, who passed away from COVID a few months ago, who didn't get a high school or college degree, but was one of the best people at living life that I've ever met. I mean, she made it 98 years and went viral a few years ago for shooting baskets successfully on Black Twitter. It's a sight to behold. And so I consider her one of my mentors because my grandmother just really taught me how to live, how to find joy, how to never feel like the limitation of something like aging defined me. I mean, she was 98 barefoot outside shooting baskets with 21-year-old cousins of mine, right? People on Twitter didn't believe us, but that was the kind of person she was. And I had in my notes, life mentorship. She's taught me that you're never too old to live your life and to do and be what you want to be. I also just think in terms of the mentorship piece, that being your true authentic self is something that sounds really trite, but it's important. When you reach out to people for mentorship opportunities, tell them who you really are. I think the thing for me that makes it hard for me sometimes when people want to reach out to me for a mentorship relationship is when I feel like they want to become something that they think I am, or they think somebody else is, and something that their false self thinks they want to be. I want to know, who are you really? What is the thing that really makes you feel alive and yourself in the world? And how can I help get you there? How can I help shine what you're already radiating even brighter, and to help you grow in the way you need to grow to get you where you're going? And I just think a lot of times there's so much performance that happens because people feel like if they show their full selves, they won't be in the door, they won't be accepted. So yes, there are professional things that are very important that we all need to know in order to get into certain spaces, and we have to be good at our craft in order to move forward. But that essence of who you really are, keep and fight for that. I fully know it's why I am where I am today, and I've gotten that feedback. And the last thing I'll say, because I know I've said a lot about this, but I feel really passionate about it, is that, you know, when I first came on to Random House, I was feeling a little self-conscious because I had never been in a corporate job. I've worked in nonprofits my whole life and in movements and as an artist and doing all sorts of things that do not make sense on a traditional resume. Like everything's everywhere, but there is a through line, is what my boss also said. She said, "Oh, I saw the through line, even though it's all these things, they're everywhere, but I saw the backbone of that." And I was feeling nervous about, will I be accepted? Will I, you know, who do I need to be now? Even I, as I'm saying all this, had that. And I remember going in saying, you know, what are the sensibilities that I need to lose? Because I came from this sort of independent, sort of unorthodox state. And I remember talking to a couple agents who were saying, "Oh, well, that was an unorthodox move. Never seen that before." And I had some people saying that to me, and I got nervous when the agents would say that to me. But then I heard from people, no, it's a good thing. And one of my colleagues said, yeah, you know, when you come in and you talk about your books in meetings, it's kind of refreshing because it shows that you've been all these different places. Because when sometimes if people have been in the same place for a long time, they start to talk the same way. And so she was saying, embrace that. And when I finally went to my boss about it and kind of said, yeah, you know, I feel, you know, what are the things I need to let go of? She said, we hired you to be yourself. And I said, well, tell me, what's a Random House book? She said, what's a Jamia Wilson's book? A Jamia Wilson book at Random House. That is what I want you to think of yourself, that I'm getting good mentoring from my bosses around how I was brought on to be myself. When you get that job and you get to that place where they've brought you there for a reason, don't lose that self that got you there in the first place. And I think that that's an important thing to hone in the mentorship relationship. How can this mentor help you keep that core essence of who you are intact also, and to discern what are the spaces you should be in that are in the best service of you maintaining that and you growing that versus diminishing it or feeling like you have to hide or silence it.
Oof, I'm just taking a deep breath because I am both just in this moment. I could listen to you talk forever and also furiously taking notes because there are just so many gems that you are sharing and highlighting. And first and foremost, just so much love and condolences to you and your family, thinking about you and your mom and your grandma, and just recognizing that their legacy lives and breathes through you, and just grateful to also have them in this space with us. And I'm going to take a deep breath for a second because it was so beautiful and so vulnerable for you to share that with us. Thank you. Yes. And what you were sharing too about how creating space to have mentors in your life that remind you to be yourself and to show up as your most authentic self, especially as you mentioned in this patriarchal capitalist society that tries to make us conform in so many ways in order to be accepted, in order to be valued. And I'm thinking about one of my mentors, Deborah Mankart, who is the executive director of Teaching for Change and an incredible lifelong organizer. I'll never forget one time I said to her, just in a random conversation, I was like, oh, when I grow up, I want to be like so-and-so, this scholar that I really admire. And she looked at me in the eyes and she said, Cierra, you are already a great version of you. And that is one of the best pieces of career advice that I think that I've ever gotten. Is just the reminder of that you yourself, there's nobody else in the world like you. Nobody else has your experience, your story, your voice, your talents, your gifts, but also your pain, right? Nobody else has all of the nuances and the complexities that make you who you are in this world. And so I'm just really grateful to you for highlighting the importance of that in mentorship, but also how you are reframing mentorship, again, in a patriarchal capitalist society where there's so much emphasis on mentorships only for career advancement, to look to the people around us, to remind us of life lessons. I think of some of my students, so I've taught babies as young as 2 up through adults. And I think about the 2-year-olds who are super nervous in dance class the first day. And Zoe, I'm thinking about Zoe right now, who ran in the middle of the stage at the dance recital and just outstretched her arms and waited for applause. And she found the light. She found the physical light and she stood in it. And what a life lesson that is that even when you're nervous, even when you're afraid, sometimes you got to stand in the light and be ready to accept that applause. So I just love how you are reframing the way that we are thinking about mentorship beyond just career, but also those life lessons. And I'm thinking about how so many of my mentors have happened in the small moments where they've planted a seed or they said something that I never thought about before. But also mentors that have spoken my name in rooms that I've never experienced, or with people that I've never met before. And I'm thinking too about my dissertation advisor, my chair, Dr. Claudia Galindo, who would always tell me, her feedback from me was always, more you in this work, more you in this work. Because in academia, what so often happens is you feel like you have to speak in a certain way, or you have to use certain terms. Just like you said, you're regurgitating some of the things that you've been taught again and again and again. And she would always say, more you in this work. And so just loving this really thoughtful and powerful reminder that you're sharing with us, to surround yourself with people who pour into you and believe in you and believe in the most authentic version of you. So in shifting gears just a little bit, so many of your beautiful books encourage young people to engage in activism, to know themselves, to become revolutionaries, and to resist oppressive structures and systems that further perpetuate hierarchies. So I would love to dig into the importance of this work together. So what draws you to activism? Why is it important and necessary to support the next generation of activists? And how can we, as those within and connected to the media industry, really leverage our power to support the next generation?
Oh, thank you so much. And I love that. I was taking notes too. I love more you in this work. I was actually just thinking about how that's something that I should tell some of my authors. You know, I often will say, I want to hear, especially when I have people who come out of academia, it's so hard sometimes, I think, to talk about themselves, but that's what brought them to the work or their field of study, and I want to know more. So I was just taking notes about that. And, you know, it's so important to me that the next generation feels empowered to tap into their own knowing about what needs to be resolved. You know, I've been thinking a lot about inheritance, and what that means. Inheritance, what started the conversation of inheritance, I started thinking about, in the context of movements, and then in the context of, reparations, or the context of the global climate problem that we're having. And what does that really mean? And there's a generation of people who are inheriting a lot of problems that they didn't have a hand in creating. And what does that mean? How can we be good ancestors now to support them in helping to create the solution? That is something I think about a great deal. And I think about in terms of the approach I have to writing about activism, uplifting works of others, and also, advising and supporting the young activists who ask for my counsel. Because one thing that Gloria Steinem, who's been a mentor in my life, although she'd probably say, don't call me mentor, we're friends, we're partners. Gloria doesn't like the hierarchy of that name. She has said many times that she learned to get mad on her own behalf, and that's what she teaches the young people in her life. And that's something she taught me that I try to pay forward. That Gloria was coming up during a time where there had been some feminist foremothers who were still alive during her time too, who had been really focused on suffrage. And because that had been their work, they were so focused on everything around legislatively, they had built around that and saying it's all about and only about suffrage for women, not as relates to race, and other things. And I'm thinking about Alice Paul specifically, who kind of, even with how she constructed the ERA in terms of, and its relationship to the Civil Rights Act, like made it so that she could have gender specifically kind of put in so that if the Civil Rights Act fell, white women would still be covered. That is a thing that happened. So in that, Gloria had mentioned to me about how she would have people like that, like Paul, who would say, hey, I know what I'm doing. I was here during suffrage. I was leading during that time. I had this. This is what you all should be focused on. And her saying, oh, but right now, what I'm facing is I'm having trouble getting an apartment when I am making up my own living. Or in Gloria's time coming up in her early age, she was saying, or that you needed a man to get a credit card, that, your husband, if you had one, would be needed for that. And that was what she and her friends at that time, as they were coming of age, were facing. And that's what really taught her to get mad on her own behalf. And so she providing that language and that context has been super helpful for me when I've had frustrations with approaches that I've seen that would be different than the approach I would take from people who are younger than I am, because I kind of stop and do that Kingian principle of nonviolence of, okay, how can I look at this not from a place of judgment, but actually, come from a place of hearing this and a place of non-judgment first, so that I can really listen. And understand, because if the next generation is getting mad on their own behalf, they probably have reasons for it. They probably have a set of experiences and lived realities around it. And I've applied it to some of the frustrations I had when I was younger around not feeling understood, when I'd had people who'd say, okay, honey, I was here 25 years ago, and this thing you're saying isn't going to work because this is what we tried, right? And remembering how I felt when that was said to me is what I'm also trying to keep in my mind's eye as I approach the next generation, with a place of curiosity versus judgment, a place of connection versus shutting down. And of course, we're all human. So there are some moments where I'll be like, oh my God, I tried that, right? And then I'll have to ask myself and then say, okay, let me have some grace. I'm sorry, I jumped the gun. I was triggered. Let me be accountable for that. And here's why. And I'll give you an example of a couple of just tangible ones, if that's helpful, of movement things that I've seen this kind of work with. So I remember when we were talking about the slut walk movement several years back, and there was a lot of conversation and discord about whether or not people should be slut walking, whether it was only a white women's movement, because women of color felt as if the connotation of that was different, that the safety level of reclaiming a word like that was different if you didn't walk in a white body or an able body. And I remember at the time there were a lot of people pressuring everybody who was like a feminist with a platform to take a stand either way. Are you pro slut walk or are you not? And if you're not, you're slut shaming. And if you're not, and it was a whole thing. And then a lot of Black feminists were like, it's not even slut for us. It should be hoe walk, right? There was all these things were happening. And I remember at that time feeling like, oh, I think I'm coming of age because I'm having a weird moment of seeing a lot of different sides of this and wanting us to march forward together, and none of us feeling like we've lost anything or like we're silent in any way, but that we can all march forward in the same direction, but be who we are. And had some conversations with the organizers about what I thought might work, along with other people who had that. Although there were some other people who just said, I'm not going to participate, and which I respect, right? But it was just kind of a choice in terms of how to do it. And I remember it just came from that mentorship I'd had from Gloria, because she was really at that time also saying, hey, they got to get mad on their own behalf. This is what the young generation is wanting to do. How do you support them in doing that? You can tell them what you know, but how do you support them in doing what they see is becoming a predominant issue in their community? And I think this is showing itself in a lot of other movements we're having right now. And what concerns me is that sometimes when we don't think about having that collaborative mentorship, that like listening, the curiosity versus the judgment, we spend time fighting each other versus actually getting done the work that could liberate us all. So that is an important question you asked, because I'm trying, in addition to supporting the next generation, I'm just trying to be a better listener. I'm trying to get more curious. I'm trying to be the ancestor that I always wanted to have for me, that I didn't always get. And it's kind of like the relationship you have with a parent. You know, I loved my parents, but maybe some of you have perfect parents. I did not. And, you know, every human being comes with their own set of traumas and shortcomings because we're human. And I kind of see it that way, that I'm trying. My mom would say, look, I'm just hoping that I tried to like mess you up in the least way possible. That's what she would always say, because she was raised in the same society with the same issues. And I kind of feel that way. You know, I'm singing in a tongue-in-cheek way, but I want to mess up the next generation in the least way possible by trying to do what I think is best with the tools that I'm given to listen, to support, to encourage, to model, to love, to take responsibility, to apologize when I'm wrong, which I think goes a long way, and to live in radical solidarity and accountability, and to show more than I tell. That's what I try to do. And so, you know, I really try hard to support people, the people who work with me. You know, my assistant, I love to talk with him about what he thinks about the books that we're reading together, encourage him to receive his own submissions, and encourage him to meet people. I'm always, you know, excited to introduce him to anyone he wants to meet, invite him to meetings I have with authors, things like that, because it's important to me to include and model in the way that I want it to be. And that's some people also allowed for me to have that space to do. And so I think once we get power, the measure of who we are is based on what we do with it. And that's a question that I think we need to keep asking ourselves as we go along in life, not just kind of like, oh, I'm going to ask myself that when I feel disempowered and now I have the power. And now that's not a question I ask myself. I think that's when you ask the question even more deeply. And I think sometimes it's hard because if you come from any sort of marginalized background, it can feel hard because you still feel somehow like you don't have the authority, but the power we do have is still power, and it still comes with some privilege. So it's important to really think about, okay, when we're paying it forward for the next gen, how am I using that power? How am I being, if you're in a gate-kept industry like mine is, a liberated gatekeeper, right? And I'm a pragmatist, so that's why I say it. Like, I'd be lying to say that like in any media industry that as we have it right now, unless it's like a fully socialist media collective, right, that is not like relying on bandwidth supplied by any of the conglomerated companies, then you're kind of in that. And so I just think about how can I be a more liberated gatekeeper in the choices I make every day, in the moves that I make, in the doors that I open, in the gates that I leave open, in the connections that I'm making for people, in the things I'm speaking up about. And how can I make a series of choices each day, each week, each month, each year, each book, each movement decision to pay the way forward for other people and to lift others up as I'm climbing forward too with me. And you will see that even the small things will have larger reverberations over time. And I think it's really exciting. And I just love when I see people who, you know, were my intern kicking butt. I saw one of mine the other day. It was, you know, she's a major lawyer leading the way at a major think tank now. And I always knew she was smart and brilliant and the world is better for it. And there's just so many other people like that I just feel so blessed to have had just a short impact on their life, but to have been a part of their growth and they and mine. So I think that's really important too, that sometimes we get so caught up on the issues we're organizing around, but not how we're kind of engaging with each other as we're organizing. And I think that's actually just as important as the work with a capital W.
Ooh, yes, 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 yes to all of this. And the question that you asked of when we get power, what do we do with it? I think about that all the time, especially in working with young people and being an educator. I believe that what oftentimes happens in many spaces, but I'll use education as a personal example, is that we ask young people, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? Or here, let me encourage you in your organizing and your activism. But then it's irresponsible of us to not actually follow through on what the suggestions they are proposing. And so in thinking about this power of like shared power, right? Not only shifting it, but really grappling within ourselves to think about how we can share power, especially with young people, and really moving to a place where I try to see myself and just like, I love that you always mention that we make mistakes, right? So I don't always do this perfectly and I grapple with it critically all the time, but I try to be the yes woman. I try to be the hype woman of, you think if that's the idea that you want to go with, let's try it. It might not work. I don't tell them that. I think that in my mind, but I'm like, you may make mistakes. It may be a little messy, but why not? That's my go-to question is why not? Why not at least try and see if it works, right? Because I think that as society continues to move forward and we have all of these technological advances, right? I'm thinking about the young people that I work with that are leveraging TikTok as an outlet to be in conversation, to organize strategically on this platform in ways that I could never even think of, right? And so I'm really just thinking about the brilliance and the knowledge that comes along with this current moment and seeing the moment from a completely different perspective that they then offer, which is exciting. And also, again, a little bit daunting as we think about the opportunities that are really there for us to be responsible, but also exactly as you keep mentioning, to be accountable. Like, how do we be accountable to movement? And something that you mentioned too is just the power of intergenerational work. I think what happens sometimes is that there are so many silos, and not only silos within the different perspectives about certain issues, but even within our own movements about how we get siloed and say, okay, this is a youth organizing group, this is a parent organizing group, but really how do we work together? And it's all about relationships, right? To build a world that we all deserve to live in, a world where there's justice, joy, and love, we have to be in deep relationship with self and deep relationship with others. So I just appreciate you highlighting the importance of doing the intergenerational work necessary in order to move us forward, because there's knowledge on all sides. And so how do we really pull and leverage that knowledge together? And so as I go into our last question before we open it up for audience Q&A, we're talking about activism. And so I want to create a direct tie between our conversation about activism, but also how we started the conversation with our heart's work in storytelling. And so really thinking about language and storytelling as activism. And one thing that I've learned recently that I've really been sitting with, that was shared with me by the Reframe Institute, is they talk about how organizers organize people, and then as radical communicators, we organize words and language. So really, again, bringing that power together, to think differently and more nuanced about how we take the action, both with the language, recognizing that it is all a shared experience. And so in pivoting a little bit back to the storytelling and media aspect, in previous years of this program, this group has discussed the need to create change in media and how creating change in media can translate to other aspects of society. So how do you seek to create change in the media? How do we build narrative power? And what is your vision for a transformed media industry and even maybe a transformed world? I know that's a large question, a hefty question, but what is this drive to create change? What does it lead to? Where are we going?
Well, I feel like we are living during a really exciting time. I mean, I was kind of, here even today, this whole thing with Facebook naming itself Meta or whatever is happening. I'm going to still call it Facebook, but I think we're in an interesting pivotal time, and we have an ability now, not without its own complications, to create our own media, to have more access to helping to drive the direction of conversation than ever before. And although we need to build more ownership for those of us who are left out and not given the access, the space, and the resources that we deserve, and the justice and parity that we need in terms of representation systemically in those spaces, we still have an ability to be able to speak truth to power in ways that we did not have before, using a variety of tools and making our own media, and also holding the people who are making media, and not in ways that are healthy, but in toxic ways, accountable, be accountable to us, the people and the users of these tools. And I think that media literacy is so important, and it always has been, but to really educate ourselves and then educate others and the next generation. I'm a real big passionate believer in social emotional learning for young people, because I think it's important to teach in terms of how now, I think in schools, they should be teaching kids about internet conduct and online harassment and abuse. And as that relates to social emotional learning and empathy, because what can happen with these tools is it can also create a distancing where we can undermine the humanity of one another, because we think, oh, they're in a box or they're distant. And the reality is we're still humans, and we can still be affected by violent language, violent engagement, social violence. So I think that taking steps to do media activism, to push platforms, to make platforms that are safer and more accessible, to do their part to make their products available for people who can't afford them, to pay their fair share, to be accountable when people have been harmed for the tools, to create protections so that their tools are causing more help versus more harm, and to dispel the belief that these tools are somehow agnostic, because they're not. There's data that shows that algorithms are, they're built by humans, so they're informed by human biases. They're informed by human oversight, and really pushing on these platforms to do that as it relates to how they're taking stock of what kind of content they're putting out, what kind of content they're promoting, and what kind of content they're fostering that could be fanning the flames of really dangerous and violent content, while also making sure that we protect free expression, and make a difference between what that is and hate speech. And so I think all of those things are important work that we can all do. And I also think we can all do some work to get ourselves educated and others about how we can use the media to help versus harm too. And so one example that's a very nerdy thing that I like to talk about is Wikipedia. Everybody uses Wikipedia all the time, whether they are admitting it or not. I know when I was teaching undergrads, I was always kind of like, oh, I know that this paragraph was lifted directly from Wikipedia, and like, we need to have a conversation about that. So I always joke about that because I used to say to people like, oh, don't, because I'm on Wikipedia a lot. And the reason that is because Wikipedia is such an important sort of public education tool in the context of media being a public education tool. But the reality is that Wikipedia, the majority of the people who've edited it for a really long time, don't reflect the diversity of the people on this call or in our larger human family. And that impacts, just like the social tools I was mentioning in some of these media tools, that impacts the bias of what some of these topical pieces will be about. And if you go and you look up something like reproductive rights, or you look up something about race, you really need to think about it with a lens of, oh, who might have written this? What kind of point of view? Who are the majority of people who write for Wikipedia? It's a lot of white men with PhDs, was, you know, a huge segment of the population. And thinking about that, just like you would if you were watching Fox News, you would recognize that there would be a particular bent to that versus MSNBC. Looking at things like Wikipedia with that same kind of eye, I think is really important. But in terms of the things that we can all do, is that because it is a tool that we could all become editors of, we can join and become editors and learn how to edit Wikipedia and help change the ratio, but also change the direction of content we care about. So one of the practices I used to do that was sort of like a mindfulness practice for me, if you'll indulge me, is sometimes I would go on Wikipedia and edit the pages of feminists who had been mean to me, if there had been anything wrong about them, to make the piece be more true and balanced. I did that as a thing. It was almost like a forgiveness practice, to be like, you were mean to me, but I'm nicely editing the hate speech on your Wikipedia page because it does something for me, forgiveness wise, and it does something for the culture as well. Now, that's just kind of my own weird quirk, but it was something that I found really fun, because it made me think, oh, you know, if this is a thing that kind of gets me to do it, if other people were to do this for whatever other thing they want to see, it could really change, and it could change. Or sometimes I would just go on and there'd be something I would hear about or read about, and I'd be thinking, this is really important. Oh, is it on Wikipedia? You know, and I was thinking specifically about, there's a movement in my neighborhood that's a mostly like Afro-Latinx community around hate speech against Dominicans and how that's rising in New York. And I thought, oh, I don't see that. So it's something I've been thinking about going in and trying to see if I can build that page or start it, right? I think that Wikipedia is just one example of that kind of tool that we could really use. We have young people right now going on TikTok and doing book and history presentations, contextualizing really important scholarly research for the broader public. I listen to a ton of historic podcasts. I learn from popularized content and also create it for other people. So that's just something else I think we can do. Pick the intervention or interventions you want. Think of the questions that keep you up at night and start making media. And one example would be, you know, I have a friend, Kate Kelly, who had started a podcast, Ordinary Equality, and it was all about the history of the ERA. And she had me on to talk about Alice Paul and the ERA because she was the author of it, but also some of Alice Paul's issues around race, which, you know, have been well documented. And how do I hold as a feminist a respect and a deference to what Alice built as a suffragist, and also a healthy critique of the stance she took at that time and the ideologies she supported. And I think of that a lot with the author of The Yellow Wallpaper as well, an important feminist book, but also someone who had white supremacist views. And she had me to come on to talk about that. And I ended up becoming a frequent contributor, and they asked me to join season 2 and for us to build together season 2 that would be about the history of abortion. And we discovered in our conversations about it that since we were both raised in really, really religious homes where we were both going to Sunday school and hearing very specific messages about it, that we realized we needed to do the research ourselves to understand what is it that we know about the history, because most people got the history of what it is from the same channels we did, and only when we received the information that we received did we change our mind on that particular issue. So I'm just sharing that to say too that it's not about necessarily feeling like you have to take on everything, but it's about figuring out where you're interested, where you feel like you have a point of view that can make a direct intervention or change. And what Kate and I could do is talk about a shared experience. And then we brought on a lot of people like us. You know, my best friend from Sunday school who used to go, we both went to Christian boarding schools. She used to go to crisis pregnancy centers and volunteer in high school and is now changed her position. And she and I were on the show just talking about it. And so we've received, and Kate is an ex-Mormon who was excommunicated for being a founder of the ordained women movement. So I was saying, you know, all of us sort of, you know, fallen excommuniques of different sorts who have come together and are talking about this hot button issue aren't alone. There are other people who through our stories will see themselves. And we've received emails from people saying, oh, I never knew that there was this whole long Southern strategy about why all the Southern states are now passing these laws. To us, it came as no surprise because we were doing the historic work. So I share that because we looked at a really kind of, you know, one big issue in the country, but a sort of sliver into it and a sharp, close read, you know, and you're in academia, so like a close read on an issue with the lens of our experience. And we have listeners who, similar to us, have come from very nuanced paths, who come from communities like ours that are deeply religious. And I'm still in my religion and Kate is not. And we were able to talk about those intersections on the show in an accessible way. And so I just want to say we were able to do that. We're able to educate, inspire, and mobilize, bringing people in from the organizations that we love and have a lot of fun doing it. So I'm also just saying that because I think when we talk about changing the media, we focus so much on the hard part, which is kind of changing the hearts and minds of the people we need to get to change policies. And that is very much a part of the work. And that is the assignment, must be understood. And there's also a whole lot of fun we can have making podcasts. I mean, every day I'm just thinking up ideas. Like, I'm like, I want to do a feminist activist tarot deck. That's like on my bucket list, just because I want to. You know, my husband was getting these grants to do operas, and one of his friends said, oh, Jamia can write. Can you teach her how to do libretto? And he said, well, she knows how to read music in a kind of mediocre way. Let me see if she'll do it. And then we did one about Breonna Taylor. And then we have 3 others. One's about student loan debt, because I have a lot of passion about that. And it's, you know, definitely a part of hindering my freedom. But then, you know, 2 others, another one about sexualization in the media, and another one about the idea of legislating rape and rape culture in politics. And we had a lot of fun. And it's not that I'm the best libretto composer in the world, but it's a way that I'm able to reach people and get people thinking. And we've had people see those operas in person, but also use the social media versions of them to share and to create discourse. And I also hope to see themselves that they can make art, they can make and produce conversation, they can intervene. And so I just want to ask you to think about what's the thing you want to do and how can you make it be seen out in the world. And, you know, for me, I didn't feel there was enough I could do with Breonna Taylor's killing. And when this opportunity came to forth to us, it was not like it was the only thing that needed to be done, but it was a way for me to kind of contribute to the collective scream in only the way that I felt like I was seeing it and needing to grieve it, but also to share with others, and also to heal whatever dynamic I was feeling in the relationship I have with my partner who is white. You know, how can I want to see you doing more about this? So I invited him to create this with me, right? So I think there's just so much we can do in community around this too, to issue invitations to others to help create this media.
Wow. I'm thinking about how you were using this really illustrative example of Wikipedia and the power to be able to edit some of these stories and who actually is telling these stories. And I know with the young people that I work with, that's one of the things that we do in our work. So we look at what's happening on social media. We look at what's happening in the media, like how are different news outlets talking about the issues that we're passionate about. We look at the history textbooks and see how they are not talking about the things that we are passionate about. And I ask them these questions of whose story is being told, who is telling the story, who is not, why, what is the underlying message of this story, what is between the lines, and then what if we just rewrote this? What if we rewrote this? What would it look like? What stories would you want to tell? And so I appreciate you bringing us to that or illuminating that for us, because I think that those questions are so critical for all of us to explore together. So I want to make sure to create some time and space for audience questions. I believe that Kylie is going to pop in to help us with some of the Q&A, but really just grateful for this conversation, Jamia. Learning from you and learning alongside you has been such a gift, and I look forward to future conversations and also to co-conspire.
Thank you. I love your
question. Down together.
And I love everything that you said, and I'm excited to stay connected and to co-conspire with you too. And I love to dance, so I love that you're saying that too. I'm kind of like, always trying to find an excuse to have a feminist dance party. And I was thinking about Rutgers. I'm kind of a yes person like you too, in the sense of, what can we do? And Brittany Cooper, who had been one of my authors at Feminist Press and a good friend, we asked them to do a feminist workshop on the Crunk Feminist Collection, so I could also hire a feminist DJ who was a friend, and we could have, a sort of feminist teach-in / dance party. And it happened, and it was fabulous. And some people came and protested it. And Brittany Cooper, and the way that Professor Cooper is, handled it. And so did Melissa Harris Perry, who was there. And it made me think, this is why I love being a feminist so much. This is what we do. We all stood up for it. And then what was so great when, some of the people at the venue were saying, do you want us to call the police? I said, no, we don't need a carceral solution. We're going to tell them what we need and what the standards are, that this is our mic. They are not passing it. And as Brittany said that night, let the DJ play after she had her last word. And that's exactly what happened. And we all stayed together. And then some of the people who protested it stayed with us and danced the night away. And I was thinking, here we are remaking the world. That's what I like to do, right? And so I love what you said about reauthoring it, because in that moment, I remember when someone said, oh, you should just call the police. And I thought, that's not what we're going to do. These people are nonviolent. But what we are going to do is tell them how to respect this Black feminist space and how we show up and show out. And if they want to play in that, this is how they need to behave. And so I just wanted to share that too, because I think a lot of times we don't exercise the muscle of reimagining. And I just have that as one of my best memories. It could have been one of the worst, right? But it was actually amazing. And I think about it all the time in terms of the messiness and how you can make beauty out of it. Hi, I would love that. That DJ is still here and available and spinning.
Before closing us out, we have a few minutes for questions. I know we had some guests submit in advance, but I do want to open it up for anyone who wants to unmute, turn their cameras on, or drop it in the chat as well, and I can read it out loud. But this was just so incredible. I could sit here forever and all night, but want to give us some space for any questions anyone has. I can kick us off with one submitted in advance if we want, because there are a lot of really great ones. our guests tonight, some who could join now and will tune in after to the recording, of course. But one question is, I think you guys touched on this a bit, but what is one thing, if there is one thing, that you wish you could go back and do when you were first starting out in your work with what you know now? And that's for both Jamia and Cierra.
Ooh, Cierra, I'm so curious to hear what you're going to say, because I'm thinking, oh, I have a litany. Let me think about it.
Yes, I feel the same way. And the one thing that is coming to my mind is to trust my own voice. I think for a long time, I oftentimes share as part of my life story that I was a very shy child. I hated raising my hand in class because I was always afraid of having the wrong answer and being chastised and laughed at. And so that ultimately transcended into even parts of the ways that I still show up today. And so I wish that I would have trusted my own voice a little bit more, to know that what I had to offer, the experiences that I have are unique, as all of ours are. And there were so many times even in college, I'm thinking about in my PhD program, where there were so many people, I'm looking at a few of them right now, Lisa and Sasha, that supported so much of my work and poured into that work and made me believe in myself in times that I knew and times that I was made to not believe in myself. And then when I was in my PhD program, there were classmates that told me that my work was not empirical because I wanted to do creative arts-based methodologies. I had professors who told me that my work wasn't valid and it wasn't valuable because I wanted to study Black girls. And I was continuously being told that I had to substantiate my claim and my research. And I wish so many times in those moments that I would have just had some choice words, but I wish that I would have just trusted my voice to know that the different things that I wanted to study offered that perspective that is oftentimes and so many times is stifled in academic research. So I would have trusted myself and trusted my own voice and became more comfortable even with the sound of my own voice. Is that something that I continue to work on still to this day?
That's so beautiful, and it resonates with me a lot. Trusting my own voice is totally resonates. And when you said the sound of your voice, I remember one of my early jobs, one of the older people who was, and when I mean older, she was like 30, but at the time I thought, oh my gosh, she's so old. And now I'm far above 30. But I had heard that she at a happy hour had said to other people that I had a baby voice and was mocking me. And for a really long time, that really hurt my feelings, having had people tell me that I was the butt of an office joke. And it really got to me for a while and made me feel really self-conscious. So like you said about the sound of your own voice, we shame and undermine and ridicule other women because of internalized misogyny. And it's really disgusting and toxic. And so I wish that I had enough righteous outrage and backbone to tell that person what I thought of that at the time. I wish that I had, and not at times, shrunk myself to make other people feel tall. I wish that I had set radical boundaries much earlier in my life. And I wish that I treated my body better. I wish that I didn't feel like I had to be near to the edge of burnout, sick, hungry, starving, stressed to the nth degree to feel like I was getting work done and showing other people how hard I worked and how much I deserved to be there. Those are all things that were unnecessary, and I highly caution you towards not doing them. And I also think I wish that I had reported people who had harassed me in the workplace. I wish that I had taken action rather than being silent in some cases where I saw it happening to others. And I have talked to some of those people just like they've talked to me about apologizing for not having taken action. But I think that's also really important. Somebody recently came to me about a situation I had, and they said, I'm really sorry when I saw those other people bullying you that I did nothing 10 years ago, and it's really been bothering me. And so I also just want to say it's never too late to, if you do have those regrets, make amends or do something to right it in some way, and only you will know what that way is. But yeah, I've got a lot of those that I think about, but all of those things have also contributed to my growth and helped me become a more empathetic and compassionate person to myself and to other human beings. So I also think when we look at the regrets, we have to approach them in a compassionate way and to have grace with ourselves, because we are humans, and so we do have the choice of growth always, no matter what we've done.
Thank you, Jamia and Cierra, both for sharing that, and hearing you talk about these experiences and what you shared, seeing how that now shapes you and how you mentor and support and guide the next generation, who you're with, your loved ones. It's beautiful to see that evolution, right? Learning, and then looking back and reflecting, and then being that and bringing that self to the work that you do and to the lives that you lead. So thank you both for sharing. We have time for one more, and I believe Beth Eisen has a question, so I'm going to throw it to her so she can ask.
Hi, ladies. I just want to say this is everything I didn't know I needed tonight and everything I absolutely needed tonight. So thank you. I want to ask a little bit about the intersection between editing and authentic voices. So in my role, I am constantly trying to bring out and help people bring out their most authentic voices. And the people that I'm working with are consistently not sure how to show up, and not sure what authentic means for them, how to bring that into written and oral communication. And then on the other side, I'm working with like editing standards that don't necessarily encompass everybody's authentic voice properly. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to either any experiences of pushing the boundaries of changing editing standards within your organizations, what you do, how you've worked, or helping to enable people to feel more confident being able to bring their authentic selves and knowing that we're working on the standards and progress is coming, and to kind of trust in an untrustable system in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak a little bit about what I loved about Feminist Press as a place to start out on this side of the desk at publishing, is that Feminist Press has its own style guide. So Feminist Press uses the Chicago style, right? And so that's a style, and that's, a format, but because it's feminist nature, there was always this evolving style guide about the ways in which we would talk about a great many things, including gender, expression, expansive expression, race. We've been capitalizing Black for a long time before a lot of other publications are capitalizing Black, just saying. And that was always joyful for us to be like, oh, we're going to add this other thing, or we're going to, and it would also be hard sometimes generationally. I remember once having a dialogue with, people who were very angry with me for putting pregnant people into dialogue and editing it back, right? Editing it back. They'd edit it back, and I'd say, no, I on purpose edited to pregnant people because this is what we are saying inclusively with our current style and mission. Or, the questions around the terminology of Blacks. And I had to have some conversations with people who grew up during a time when, non-Black people they felt like they could say Blacks because they felt it was grammatically correct. And I was saying, we say Black people in our style, and here's why. And those are a couple examples, but really standing by those. And I had to have some fights about that, but really kind of being in integrity about why, and being able to show legit receipts about why this is important and why that language is evolving. I mean, the reality is linguistics also shows that evolutionary language is just a part of how language evolves. We put shame and things, we attach all sorts of hierarchies to the kind of language that we use attached to how people are subjected
in society. But the reality is that language itself is so much more fluid and it's not valued in that way. So I have that same approach to how I edit now. And, you know, what I love about Random House too is Random House very much, you know, leans into the style of what the voice and the author's intent. And I like to have really interesting conversations with my authors about, you know, what they're trying to get across and what decisions they're making about their prose and how best to get it across with what styles. So yeah, it is. I think we're evolving as, you know, language users, but I think it's also important to bring those values in and to think about accessibility and inclusion, and also to just speak to people from a place of helping versus condescension. Because that's one thing I've noticed in any space I've been in, when I'll say, this is the reasoning for why I do this, when I've been corrected on something. A lot of times when people hear a really good reason that's expansive and inclusive, they have a different response to me kind of shaming them for not knowing. And so that's just another piece of feedback I would want to give that I've learned around giving this kind of feedback around why sometimes I'll really advocate for certain changes. A lot of times it's just that people don't know why it's meaningful to position something in a certain way. And so it's also important to really think about the frame and how you're inviting people into a conversation versus saying, oh, you should be ashamed of yourself because you didn't know this. So that's just something that I have really learned in terms of how to start broaching that conversation. Like, did you know that this is how this has appeared? And if we say it this way, this is how it will be read. And this is what we recommend, versus, oh my gosh, you were canceled because. And I think that is really helpful.
And I'll just quickly share too, in some of my experiences, that when folks are finding it a bit challenging to really lean into their most authentic voice, to dig a little deeper, I often ask them about the ways that they best express themselves. So writing may be one, but they may express themselves through dance, or maybe they sing, or maybe there's some kind, or maybe they cook, right? So there's some kind of artistic expression. And then I ask them to experience an exercise where they are thinking about whatever topic they might be writing on while they are doing this expressive movement, or they're putting together a recipe or something, to allow them the spaciousness to think beyond the page, right? Because so much of putting our thoughts down on paper is so vulnerable, because then it becomes subject to other people's thoughts, because it no longer lives in our mind and it no longer lives in our hearts. So getting to them to a place where they can move beyond that vulnerability in a space, in a practice that feels good in their bodies and in their souls, and then having them come back to their work to see how they might then represent that. Another thing that's been helpful for me too is just the practice of using anchor text. So looking to texts that I just really enjoy, that move me, even just for what it looks like, having that as a practice, as an example, helps me to think about how I can better share who I am and what my viewpoints are on paper. And something that Jamia was talking about that I also think about often is just the praxis of Black feminist pedagogy, particularly the idea that content is key, right? Looking at the content, what is the idea here over the grammar or the syntax? If the ideas are there, really creating the spaciousness for people to lean into the ideas and to expand upon those ideas. Why do you think that? What is coming to you for this? Or what is the story that you can tell me about how this is showing up for you? And I think about the editors that I've been able to work with. I'm so fortunate. I'm thinking about the editors at Rethinking Schools, for example, who are so thoughtful in their feedback, not only for the things that they would like me to include, but the ways that they really amplify my work by being like, I really love that you said this, or this was a really great idea. And so I'm often thinking about in the places and spaces where I am as an editor, of how do I do more of that? How do I help people to feel confident and comfortable so that they can continue to develop their own voice, even if there are things that they want to add. Really creating the space to be their hype person editor has been just really fantastic, a practice that I hope to continue to emulate. And then the last thing that I'll say too, in thinking about pushing the boundaries of publication, one of the conversations that I like to have with people is about language and the history of language. So whose language is uplifted and whose language has historically been oppressed? And so how do we move beyond the boundaries of what currently exists? Well, one of those ways is to start to dismantle our own thinking about what is considered to be acceptable, quote unquote, and what is not. And so I think about some journals like Equity and Excellence in Education, who literally in their last article, they ask for submissions that do it for the culture. And so I was like, oh, I'm very much drawn to this because of the ways that they are trying to disrupt and dismantle the ways that language has been so hierarchical and privileged, and also how language then reinforces patriarchy and white supremacy. So even just having that conversation, I think sometimes with people really begins to broaden their scope, because when we think about language and language as power, and even just every single word that we use is intentional and has meaning behind it, really encouraging folks to think about, again, just how we started thinking about Sankofa, like what is the history of this? So we can think about how we dream this forward.
All right, thank you both. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but there aren't words to thank you both, Cierra and Jamia, for everything this conversation was and will continue to be. You've carried this thread of storytelling through the evening, and the stories that you gave each of us tonight. I can't help but feel just immense gratitude for those gifts that you've given to all of us, and then all of us here as storytellers to bring those with us. Cierra, I think you started with a quote saying how we're more than just one person. We're the stories of who come before us. We're the stories of those around us. And these gifts that you've given us, the stories you've shared, we will now carry forward through our work, our lives, our conversations. And so just thank you both so much for this evening. Thank you everyone as well for joining, for your questions, for creating such a special space with all of us tonight.